reducing their environmental footprint. Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you. Can hear me? You can hear me now. It's really great to be here, and for a couple of reasons. I was asked to provide an expert presentation or an expert talk. However, the panel that was just on stage were all experts. How many in the audience work in the built environment, in some area of buildings? By show of hands. I think people are being shy. There has to be more of you out there. I see some hands. The presentation that I like to give in terms of an expert talk is really more about reminding everyone in this audience of things that we already know, but maybe we've forgotten or we need some reminding about, because there are some huge priorities that we should be reminded of, both the drivers for better buildings as well as the outcomes that we should expect from better buildings. And so today I'd love to talk about the role of efficiency in that, but first let me thank the AEEE team for all of their efforts at convening meetings like this. I think it's really important. They convene other meetings throughout the year with policymakers and other experts, all of the stakeholders required for a sustainable future. This organization is convening. It's really important work. It's also important that we're all here together today. And I think in terms of this talk, I'd like to remind you of the important work that's in front of you, in front of all of us, to make sure we do our part. Because there's some good things happening, but there's also some great opportunities. So with that, let me just introduce the company. If you're not aware of Trane Technologies, we are one of today's sponsors, but in case you don't know who we are really important in cooling, providing cooling and comfort for buildings. We also are one of the major players in providing cold chain solutions for transport refrigeration. Our Thermo King business is one of the largest transporters of vaccines and fresh food around the world. And so we know cooling. We also know that there are some really upside to cooling in terms of quality of life issues. There's a downside to cooling I want to talk about as well, and some of the panel that was just here mentioned some of the things that I would like to talk about. I plan to talk about two things. One is making sure we all understand the priorities in front of us. And number two is, how do we move from these ambition discussions to actions? There's been a lot of discussions about ambition, but what about the action behind them? And so we'll talk about both of these things. First, using some data from IEA around the push for doubling efficiency. Here's the latest data through the end of 2024. Actually, this was just unveiled last week in Davos, and so I've stolen some things from IEA for today as just a reminder of the priorities. There is a huge urgency here. Energy demand is increasing. We all recognize that. Where there are more devices in this room than there were last year, and we're doubling the efficiency that's needed. We need to double the efficiency. There's this call from IEA and the UN to triple renewables and to do both of those things at the same time. If you notice from the graphic, we're not making great progress here. We're actually sliding backwards. You'll see from the note here that efficiency is actually falling. We're actually increasing demand, but productivity of the energy that's being used is not where it should be. So we're not doubling, we're actually going backwards. So this is the urgency in front of us. Here's the good news, maybe. We took several studies last year, but it's the second half of 2024, from CEOs around the world of large and medium-sized companies, and they were asked, what are your priorities related to sustainable performance going forward over the next 3 to 5 years? The good news is, much of the studies point to increased capital spending to make their footprint more efficient. Well, that's the good news. It also signals that some CEOs recognize their bottom line impacts in these investments, both for their people, for the emissions, for decarbonization, and for efficiency. We need this to be true to correct what I just showed on the previous slide. Yet, when the Carbon Disclosure Project recently collected over the past few years real data on the footprint of companies, their emissions, here's what we find. The red bars here, the deep red bars, are around whether or not companies feel that they are behind or doing well on their commitments to decarbonize, and the dark red is well behind. If you'll notice on the right-hand side, The well behind is going in the wrong direction. It's hard to reduce Scope 3 emissions, the emissions of your products, the emissions of your supply chain, and companies feel like they're moving behind or well behind in this journey. These 3 slides really tell a very troubling story to me. One is that we recognize what needs to be done, yet we're struggling to make it happen. From a company that provides cooling to the world, this challenge here is in front of me every day and really should make sense to you. The world needs more cooling and comfort. In a warming world, this is more true than ever before. At the same time, the world needs to have emissions. And as one of the panelists said earlier, buildings, we can't decarbonize and address all of this without addressing emissions that come from buildings. We have to make buildings more efficient. That's the largest driver of emissions reductions. We know how to do that, so the question is in front of us, what are we going to do about that? And I'll just be very blunt here with you. The Clean Cooling Coalition put out something that I really think is important, called the vicious cooling cycle. If you'll notice in the vicious cooling cycle, higher temperatures globally, whether we're talking Delhi or Detroit, higher temperatures are driving the need for more air conditioners, which is driving in turn more greenhouse gas emissions, which in turn creates a bigger issue for us in terms of climate impacts. This cycle has to be broken. We have to intersect this cycle at some point. Maybe it's efficiency, maybe it's through transitioning to better refrigerants, maybe it's in how we design them and use them. Whatever the reason here, this vicious cooling cycle, as they've termed it, has to be intersected and changed in the future. Here's what I do know, and one of the speakers spoke about the importance of policy and incentives. Building standards, policies, regulations, incentives all play a big role here. We can't wait on these things to address this. The policymakers have tried to address this on their own, and we're way behind. Companies have tried to address this on their own, and we're still behind. What I do know is that we can't wait on some policy carrot and incentive to make this happen. We have to find other ways to make this happen because I believe that the environmental value is there. I believe that the right companies can find economic value there. No matter the company, though, small, medium, large, whatever company you represent today, I know for a fact that one or many of these elements is actually an element that you can realize as a company. From the top, which could be bottom line savings, maybe you're just looking for cost savings. It's available through a retrofit of a building or designing and operating a building in a different way. You can also reduce the risk and make the building more resilient, the campus more resilient, your footprint more resilient. All these things are possible. This is still a very viable model to go with, which is more sustainable performance from the buildings that you operate. I want to move away from the priorities in front of us, what are these big drivers, into something I call this move from ambition to action. Our company, and one of the panelists mentioned this earlier, we see huge opportunities in 2 areas. 15% of the world's emissions is in cooling buildings just like this one. And I'm not sure if this is a train cooling system today, but whoever it is a really good one. I feel very comfortable. So hopefully you do too. But cooling a building like this one is the largest driver of the emissions of this building. So we have to attack this one. Huge opportunities there, which we heard about earlier. There's also a food loss issue. The cold chain is not as mature as it should be. And in countries like Brazil, where they're overproducing 52% of the fresh food because it's lost on the way to the consumer, we have solutions to avoid this today. So why is it that we have solutions, yet we still have these big issues? Ambition's important. My company has made big ambitions. One is called the Gigaton Challenge. It's the world's largest science-based validated target for reducing product use emissions. We've had this in place since 2019. We were the first with a 1 billion metric ton reduction commitment in the industry, in the world. It drives all of our innovation. It drives all of our people's interest, and it drives how we think about solutions in the future. Ambitions can do that. They can inspire people to do things differently. They're not the full answer, though. We've got to move from this ambition era that we've been in for the past, I'd say, 5 to 7 years. We have to move into the actions that are going to really drive some change. With honesty, the mission efficiency work out of the IEA last week was unveiled at Davos, and so I thought it really pertinent to show three points from that I thought was really important for this audience. One is, and we've all heard it before, but energy efficiency continues to be the lowest hanging fruit for buildings. Buildings are running way too inefficiently. We heard a panel talk about the importance of retrofitting. Whether we're talking retrofitting an old building or building a new building, we know how to make them more efficient. The question is, why are we not doing that? All of the items on the right-hand side of this slide, I mean, they show the opportunities that we have yet to realize, but efficiency remains number one. It's not on-site renewables. It's not in how the building is structured. It's in none of the things that we spend a lot of time on. It's in making sure that we have enabled all the methods available to make them operate more efficiently. I'll give 2 applications for 2 different sectors. One, buildings in particular. And on this one, I just wanted to point out, and it was not mentioned in this panel here, but electrification of heat is probably the most critical area for decarbonizing the built environment today. We are still heating ourselves by burning things. We've been doing this since the cave days, 10,000 years ago. We've been burning fossil fuels to heat ourselves. We've been burning fossil fuels to boil water for steam to heat buildings. We no longer have to burn fossil fuels to heat ourselves, so my question is, why are we still doing that? 96% of our heating is fossil fuel related. When we have a grid that's transforming, we have solutions that electrify the heating. Cooling we're pretty efficient on the cooling side. It's the heating side where we see most of the big opportunities for emissions reduction. So electrifying heat is number one. There's also waste heat from buildings, a lot of waste heat. To cool a room like this one, you have to throw the waste heat somewhere. The question is, where is it going and why do we still call it waste heat? Most all other areas of waste in our society, we have found a use for. I grew up on a farm in the U.S., and if you know anything about farming, there's no waste because someone is always searching on a farm with this principle of let's reuse it. Let's find a new use for something so that something's not discarded. Yet in a building like this one, in a city like the one we're in, waste heat is all around us. Waste heat can become an energy source. Waste heat can be used back to heat an area of the building that's too cool, because cooling and heating a building is just a balancing act. So we have to move away from this term waste heat. We have to find a new use for heat that we call waste today. And there are ways to do that, and there are solutions that exist today that are operating very efficiently, that can actually double the efficiency of a building's heating and cooling. The next sector I wanted to quickly share was industry. And I'll go there again. A huge amount of waste in an industrial setting. Think large industrial settings where large commodities are made, whether we're talking steel or chemicals. This sector, although complicated, still presents so many opportunities around cooling and heating and energy savings off the chart. Up to 50% is available. Another way of saying that, 50% is being wasted today, and we seem to be okay with that. And you saw the data in the beginning of this. It says we're moving backwards, not forward. So the 2 sectors that we have to address is the built environment and industry or industrial. These are the 2 big sectors. We know how to do the transportation piece, but the 2 biggest opportunities, in my view, are around the buildings, our building sector, and the industrial sector. These are our 2 big opportunities. Is it possible for one company to do that? Well, my company, you see the graph on the right, we're proving that it's possible. You can grow revenues, you can grow your business around the world. At the same time, you can decouple that growth from emissions. You can decouple the growth from energy use. So for those and a panelist was asking a similar question, not sure if this is possible everywhere. I think it is possible. I think you can continue to grow your business and at the same time decouple or move away from that emissions rising at the same time. Emissions can be reduced. Energy can be reduced? Absolutely. I actually have a graph that shows that we can do this in an absolute basis, not just an intensity basis. Growth can occur while we move away from this old thinking of that means emissions and energy use also has to grow. That's not true anymore. And I also think that doing all of these things in the building that you operate, that your company owns, it comes with other benefits that sometimes we don't talk about. Some people call these sort of the soft benefits around culture and around people. One of the speakers just spoke about IAQ, indoor air quality. Yes, that's somewhat of a soft intangible. It's hard to measure the value of that. But I do think that moving in this direction where buildings operate more efficiently, where emissions are being reduced, it has other outsized benefits too around culture and around your business priorities. When you do this to yourself, you're much better positioned to help others do this as well. And then last but not least, if you get this right, I think you position yourself to help, whether it's a national commitment like India's made around net zero or carbon neutral. Our company has made a net zero commitment by 2050, and we have to accomplish the commitments in front of us now. But the actions that are behind our commitments are what gives us comfort that this is also possible. And I will tell you that in the past, even 5 years ago, none of us would have been thinking that something like a net zero was possible. Now we're beginning to see light. Maybe the tunnel is long, but we see the light because the actions we're doing today are providing more benefits than we even expected. You call it exceeding expectations with where we are and where we've been. So with that, let me thank you for your attention. I was standing between you and lunch, so happy to take a few questions from the audience if there's time. Here's a question.
Again, I'm an architect planner. Thank you for your brilliant discourse on energy efficiency and net zero. My question is a little practical because I'm involved with the planning regulations and building regulations in Delhi. So my question is that we have about 5 million buildings in Delhi. And we also have a huge transportation overhead, which is utilizing energy. And of course, as you mentioned, industries and other things also. So the net zero and the built environment are intimately connected. We cannot disassociate these two things together. As you rightly said, that the environment and economic equity are totally intertwined, interlinked. So the question which I have in my mind that should we continue thinking about this net zero on a premise basis, on an individual building basis? Why not something like district cooling? For example, district cooling is much more efficient. So why the buildings and the transportation and industries can be tackled in a composite manner rather than at premise level or at individual building level?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The question was around district cooling. District cooling is an application that allows for cooling and heating to happen for a broad group of buildings, a neighborhood, a campus, maybe even a citywide approach. And there's a company here today that's an expert in district cooling. You're right. It's a very efficient and I think a best case example of how you should be cooling and heating. There are infrastructure concerns about putting it in place, especially as a retrofit. It's much easier to do for a new set of buildings being made in a community. It can be done, though, at a campus level. We should be doing more of that. And this is one area where we might need some government intervention. We might need some better demonstration projects. We might need some incentives to accelerate the adoption of that approach. One of the issues we find is behavioral with district cooling. People like to control their own heating and cooling. And they have some concerns sometimes about it being disseminated from a central source. although we know that it works well and the efficiencies and the emissions reductions are certainly solid. So these are the type of approaches that we should be adopting more, but we also need, I think, a policy and incentive lever that helps us accelerate that. Other questions? Over here.
Yes, I have a basic question that we are finding that there are supply side challenges. For example, demand is there for these type of solutions, but there is supply side because we are over dependent on very few, innovations from, for example, from GE Vernova, from Mitsubishi, from Honeywell, on turbines, for hydrogen, for solar, these panels, etc. And basically even for these compressors also, which are innovating quite fast, and there are not much collaborations as far India is concerned, with some of these major companies, which basically puts some kind of integration challenges, So how do we deal with that? Because otherwise, because the technology is evolving quite fast and China is also getting into it, and there will be a whole lot of challenges as far as, with partnerships and with integrating and meeting these type of challenges as from regulatory point of view. So how can we bring these kind of collaborations in the long run with these innovations?
Yeah, that's a great question. The question was around how do we ensure more integration from the building side to supply side on the energy. And I didn't mention much about the supply side. The supply side differs around the world, but we all know it's a very complicated sector. We've seen great things happening in the supply side. However, I think your question raises a great point. What we don't see yet is enough integration of all this. We don't have enough feedback from buildings to the grid, for instance. Buildings, although much smarter than they were even a decade ago, and with all of the great hope of AI and data integration, not only are buildings smarter, but they can provide feedback that the grid really needs. We're not seeing nearly enough of that currently. And I think it's because we have an incumbent supply side system that knows how to provide energy supply to a population. And we are nascent in the technologies that can make that side much smarter. And so the adoption, I think, is slow. And I'm not sure what the biggest driver is other than a regulatory driver that would speed that up right now. It's certainly, the building side can provide a lot more information. We also can do things like on-site storage, battery storage, thermal storage. Our company has a thermal storage option that we can provide to the building so that the building is more efficient. Cooling can happen when the grid is much less busy. And then during the day, we can actually provide the grid with some resilience that it currently doesn't have. So there's certainly solutions there, and you're right, it's just not being integrated and adopted at the pace that we need. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more.
Hi. So my question is a bit zoomed out again. You lead the Office of Sustainability and ESG at Trane Technologies. So in the last 5 to 10 years, and I was very happy to see the survey results that you showed about CEOs being very favorable, understanding the concerns of sustainability and thinking sustainability is good business. But perhaps there still are industries where the Office of Sustainability is not as strong or as power wielding as perhaps in your company. So what has been the learnings which perhaps stop making this office be in conflict with perhaps other functions in the business?
Yeah, it's a great question around what's the big driver for a company like mine. I think that it's a simply said but more difficult to do, and that is how do you integrate sustainability into how the company functions? It's not a sideline, some adjacency. Sustainability done right adjusts the way the company runs at the process level. You design products with a certain process. Sustainability has to be embedded in that product design process to make it meaningful. You operate your factories a certain way. Sustainability has to be embedded in the way that factories are operated to change them fundamentally. And then last but not least, you have to attach sustainability to the compensation of leaders, because that's what drives and motivates people to do things differently. If you want to adjust the behavior of employees, you adjust their objectives and you attach it to their promotions, their merit raises, their reviews, and how people are compensated. I think you do those three things, you fundamentally change a company. And people are searching for ways to win and to improve, because sustainability, it's a big word. I like to think of it as it's just continuous improvement. It's next year will be better than we were last year, and you're constantly searching for the ways to win and do that. Thank you all for your time.
I'd like to invite Dr. Satish Kumar on stage to felicitate Mr. Scott Tew. Thank you so much for your talk, sir.
We would now like to announce the soft launch of one of our projects. For that, I would like to invite Dr. Satish Kumar, Pramod Kumar Singh, Scott Tew, and Santosh Kumar to come on stage and announce the project study. Please welcome our guests. We are announcing the joint study on the enhancing resource efficiency in data centers. This is a joint study by Alliance for Energy Efficient Economy and Trane Technologies. I would also like to invite Mr. Rohit and Mr. Zubain from Trane Technologies on the stage. Big round of applause. Thank you so much. Please stay tuned on our social media links and our website for the updates on this new project. Thank you. Can we have one more picture?
One more.
Okay, we will now break for lunch. So just a note, if you were in the side hall earlier and have put your bags there, please either take the bags with you or bring them to this side, because we're going to reset that section for another session.